On the outer edge of a peaceful, distant galaxy, the Zorakians, a highly advanced alien race, had never known fear. Their civilization was one of peace and prosperity, their scientists leading the way in intergalactic exploration. They had built incredible cities, mastered deep space travel, and communicated with other peaceful species across the stars. They believed they were alone in the universe, untouched by any true threats. Their planet, Zoreth, sat quietly among the stars. The people lived their days in calm, focusing on art, science, and culture. There was no reason to suspect anything could disrupt their peaceful way of life. That was until something unusual happened. It started with a small blip on the Zorakians' main sensor array. At first, it was dismissed as a glitch, a shadow passing by, a minor anomaly. But the strange signal kept repeating, growing clearer, more defined. The scientists in the central control room of Zoreth's capital were puzzled. They thought it might be some sort of natural event, maybe a comet or a traveling asteroid. They had seen such events before, but this one was different. It was moving too fast. And it was too big. The head scientist, Dr. Tyra Corin, leaned over the console, her eyes narrowing as the signal grew louder. "This is no comet," she said, almost to herself, but loud enough for the others to hear. She quickly typed in a few commands to run a scan of the object's size and speed. The results flashed across the screen, and the room fell silent. "It's a ship," Dr. Corin muttered, "but not any ship we've ever seen." Her words were met with gasps of disbelief from the other scientists in the room. They quickly rechecked the data, hoping for a mistake, but the readings were clear. The object was indeed a ship, enormous in size, and it was coming straight toward Zoreth. "How fast is it moving?" asked one of the younger scientists, barely able to hide his growing panic. Dr. Corin quickly calculated the trajectory. "It's moving at a speed that we can't even match with our best technology. It'll reach our planet in just under 2 days." Fear started to spread in the room, even among the calmest minds. The Zorakians had never dealt with any kind of threat. No war, no invasions, no enemies. It had been a peaceful existence for millennia. And now, something was coming. Something big. "We need to inform the Council," Dr. Corin said, her voice now stern and focused. "We need to prepare for a possible confrontation." As the message was sent to the highest ranks of the Zorakian government, a strange unease settled over the entire capital. News spread quickly, and panic began to grow. The civilians, who had lived in a bubble of safety for so long, now felt a sense of dread. What if the ship wasn't friendly? What if it was an enemy coming to destroy them? By the time the message reached the council, their calm exterior was beginning to crack. They had never encountered anything like this before. The council, composed of the wisest and most experienced leaders, gathered in an emergency meeting. They sat around a large table, faces tense and grave. The brightest minds of the Zorakian species were at a loss. "What do we know about this ship?" asked Counselor Lorne, his voice deep with worry. "The ship is of enormous size, larger than any we have ever seen," Dr. Corin explained, showing them the data. "It appears to be an advanced warship, built for destruction. It is too fast, too powerful. Our technology is not a match for it." There was a long silence as the council digested this information. They had nothing in their arsenal that could stand up to this warship. They had no weapons capable of taking it down. And from what the sensors were showing, there wasn't much they could do to stop it. "We could try to communicate," suggested another council member, his voice trembling slightly. "Maybe they're just passing through, and we can reason with them." Dr. Corin shook her head. "I've already tried sending a peaceful signal. There has been no response. It's not responding to our attempts to communicate, and from the way it's moving, I believe it's coming here with intent." The room fell into a heavy silence. It was becoming clear that the Zorakians were facing something they could not escape from. This wasn't just any ship. It was something else, something far beyond their comprehension, and it was coming directly for them. The council knew they had only two choices: prepare to face whatever threat this warship represented or flee the planet. But fleeing wasn't an option. Their ships couldn't escape at the speed this warship was moving. And even if they could, where would they go? Their entire way of life, their entire civilization, was at risk. Counselor Lorne looked up at the others, a mix of fear and determination in his eyes. We don't know what we're dealing with yet, but one thing is certain: we cannot let our people panic. We must remain calm, and we must prepare. We have no idea what's coming, but we can't go down without a fight. Dr. Corrin nodded solemnly. We can only hope that our peaceful nature will be enough to spare us. But we must prepare ourselves. Whatever this ship is, it will be here soon. As the council began to make their final preparations, the skies above Zorith remained calm, eerily silent. The Zorakians could only wait, knowing that within hours their world would change forever. The warship had been spotted, and now it was too late to run. The Zorakian Council convened immediately after the emergency message reached them, their once composed faces now marked with concern. The peaceful civilization, which had never experienced the horrors of war, was suddenly thrown into chaos. The thought of their perfect, unchallenged existence being threatened was unimaginable. They had always prided themselves on their advanced technology, but now, standing at the precipice of an unknown and possibly deadly situation, they felt vulnerable. As the council members gathered in their chamber, the room felt colder than ever. The large, oval table that once symbolized unity now felt like a reminder of how small they were in the grand scheme of the universe. The city of Zorith, with its towering buildings and pristine streets, looked so fragile in the shadow of the impending threat. The counselors exchanged worried glances, their minds racing to find a solution. Counselor Lorne, the most seasoned and respected leader, was the first to speak. "We cannot afford to panic," he said, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. "We need to think clearly and rationally. This warship is clearly something beyond our capacity to understand, but we must prepare for the worst. What do we know about it?" Dr. Corrin, the lead scientist who had been working tirelessly to analyze the warship's signal, stepped forward. "The ship is large, larger than any vessel we've ever seen. It's traveling faster than any of our ships could ever hope to match. I've tried to reach out to it, to communicate with them, but all efforts have failed. The ship does not respond to our signals. It just continues on its course toward Zorith." A murmur of unease rippled through the room as the council members exchanged looks of disbelief. They had never experienced anything like this, and the fact that their peaceful attempts at diplomacy were being ignored only fueled their fear. "Their silence speaks volumes," Counselor Garon said, his voice tinged with worry. "We have no way of knowing their intentions, but if they don't respond, it could mean they are not interested in talking. If they wanted peace, they would have made contact." Another council member, Counselor Asha, looked out the large windows of the chamber, her eyes distant as if searching for answers in the stars. "What if they don't want peace? What if they've come to conquer us?" Her words hung heavily in the air. The thought of invasion was something the Zorakians had never even considered. They had never known the brutality of war, the devastation of being overwhelmed by a superior force. The mere thought of it seemed out of place in their peaceful world. Dr. Corrin nodded grimly. "It's a possibility we cannot ignore. This ship is not like anything we've encountered before. Its technology is beyond our comprehension. It's designed for conflict, not diplomacy. But we have no way of knowing if it's a single ship or part of a larger fleet. For all we know, this could be just the first wave." The council fell into silence again, the weight of the situation settling over them. They had always believed in their ability to solve problems through intelligence and diplomacy, but this was different. This was a threat they couldn't outthink or talk their way out of. The very idea that something or someone could pose a real danger to their way of life was unthinkable. Counselor Lorne cleared his throat, breaking the silence. We need to assess our options. Should we attempt to evacuate the planet, or do we try to defend ourselves? Evacuating would cause mass panic, Dr. Corrin said quickly. And even if we could evacuate, we don't have the resources to hide or fight back. We would just be running from something we don't understand. If we're going to survive this, we need to face it head-on. We need to prepare for war. But we have no weapons capable of fighting such a ship, Counselor Asha protested. We've never needed to develop such weapons. Our entire existence has been about peace, not war. This is uncharted territory. We cannot afford to let that be our downfall, Counselor Lorne replied. Our priority must be to protect our people. We must develop a defense. It might be too late to stop the ship entirely, but we can buy ourselves time. We need to send every last piece of technology and intelligence we have into the effort. Perhaps there's a chance, however slim, we can find a way to fight back. The council members fell into a quiet discussion, weighing their limited options. The minutes stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity. Outside, the sky grew darker as the warship's shadow loomed closer, a reminder that time was quickly running out. Do we have anything at all, that can defend us? Counselor Garon asked, his voice filled with desperation. Dr. Corrin looked up from her console, her face pale but determined. We have our scientific research. Our weapons systems are outdated, but they are still functional. If we can reconfigure them, perhaps we can create a defensive shield. It won't stop the warship entirely, but it might slow it down. We also have some experimental technology that may be able to disrupt their systems, but I'm not sure it will work against something this advanced. It's our only option, Lorne said firmly. We'll reconfigure everything we have. Every last resource will go into preparing for this fight. We'll need every Zorakian to contribute, and we need to prepare the public. They must understand the gravity of the situation. As the council began to organize their efforts, the sense of helplessness was replaced by a quiet determination. The Zorakians had always been a peaceful people, but now they had no choice but to fight. They had no idea what the warship was capable of, but they were not going to surrender without a fight. The Zorakians would defend their home, no matter the cost. Outside the council chamber, Zorath's skies remained eerily still, the tension hanging thick in the air. The warship was coming, and this time there was no turning back. The Zorakian forces, though unprepared for combat, were working tirelessly to prepare their defenses. The peaceful world that had once been so focused on innovation and harmony was now scrambling to reconfigure its entire infrastructure for one singular purpose: survival. The scientists and engineers who had once developed technologies for sustainable energy, medical advancements, and environmental preservation were now transforming those very technologies into makeshift weapons and shields. Dr. Corrin, though still shaken by the overwhelming task at hand, had thrown herself into the work with fervor. She knew that every second counted, and if they were going to stand any chance against the warship, they needed to act quickly. The world of Zorath, with its pristine architecture and peaceful communities, was quickly becoming a war zone. What had once been a hub of research and culture now housed hurried operations and tight security. The citizens of Zorath were in a state of quiet panic. They had never known the turmoil of war. The idea of their society being invaded felt like a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. The streets, which had always been vibrant with life, were now eerily quiet. News of the incoming warship spread like wildfire, and people gathered in small groups, whispering anxiously about the fate of their world. Even the most optimistic citizens couldn't deny the fear that gripped their hearts. Could they really defend themselves against something so far beyond their understanding? As the Zorakian military forces began to mobilize, Commander Kalen, a seasoned officer in the Zorakian Defense Force, stood before his troops. His face was stoic, but his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Kalen had spent his life in the peaceful military, training to protect the Zorakian people from natural disasters, not invaders. But now, standing before the best soldiers Zorath had, he knew there was no room for hesitation. "Listen to me," Kalen began, his voice calm but strong. "We don't know what we're up against, but we do know one thing. We will fight for Zoreth. Our mission is to protect our home, our families, and our future. I don't know what kind of weapons this enemy has, but I know this: we are not going down without a fight." The soldiers, though visibly nervous, nodded in agreement. They weren't warriors by nature, but they were Zorakians, and they had always valued their way of life. To surrender was unimaginable. Meanwhile, high above Zoreth, the warship drew closer. The Zorakians had only caught glimpses of it through their telescopes and sensors, but it was enough to understand the sheer scale of the ship's power. The ship was an imposing structure, covered in metallic plating that shimmered under the light of the stars. It seemed to exude an aura of authority, an unmistakable sign that its purpose was something far greater than exploration. From the bridge of the warship, Commander Thorek watched the planet below, his eyes hard with purpose. He had been tasked with leading this invasion, but unlike many of his peers, he wasn't motivated by the desire for conquest or revenge. Thorek had seen the Zorakians in his reports. Their peaceful nature was both admirable and frustrating. He understood the need for strength, but he also knew that this conflict would not end easily. His orders were clear: neutralize the Zorakians and take control of their world, but Thorek had an inkling that this would not be as simple as his superiors believed. "Prepare for deployment," Thorek commanded. "We will begin the invasion in 1 hour. I want the weapons systems primed and ready for any resistance." His officers worked quickly, inputting commands into the ship's massive control panels. Thorek's mind raced as he thought about the Zorakians. He had read the reports of their peaceful ways, their advancements in technology, and their peaceful relationship with the galaxy. But none of that mattered now. His mission was clear, and the Zorakians' ignorance of their impending doom would soon be shattered. On Zoreth, as the preparations continued, Dr. Corin and her team were working late into the night. They had managed to reconfigure some of their old energy shields into a rudimentary defense system. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. The scientists had also begun the process of preparing their weaponry, trying to use their energy-based technology to create something that could damage the warship's hull. It wasn't perfect, and Dr. Corin wasn't convinced it would work, but it was their only hope. Commander Kalen had also received reports that the warship had made no effort to communicate, only drawing closer with each passing hour. The silence was deafening. The Zorakians, who prided themselves on their ability to negotiate, were left with no option but to prepare for battle. But amidst all the preparation and tension, something strange began to occur. A series of signals, faint but distinct, began to filter through their communication systems. At first, it was dismissed as interference, but Dr. Corin's sharp mind quickly recognized that these signals were not random. They were a form of communication, a language, perhaps, but different from anything they had ever encountered. The signals were not coming from the warship itself, but from an unknown source, perhaps another ship or a device hidden within the warship's systems. Corin's heart raced as she realized that this could be their chance. If they could decode these signals, they might be able to understand their enemy and find a way to communicate, or perhaps find a weakness. But the clock was ticking. The warship would be in orbit within hours, and they couldn't afford to wait much longer. The Zorakians had prepared themselves for the worst, but as the warship closed in, they began to realize that the battle wasn't just against an unknown force. It was a battle for the soul of their civilization. Would they survive? Or would the weight of their peaceful existence prove to be their undoing? The answer would depend on their ability to adapt, to fight not only with weapons, but with the very essence of their identity as a people. In the distance, the warship loomed ever closer, and soon the final battle for Zoreth's survival would begin. The Zorakians could only hope that their preparations would be enough to hold their ground. The time for peace had passed. Now it was time for them to face the unknown. As the warship drew nearer, the people of Zoreth braced themselves for the inevitable. The once calm and peaceful planet was now a hotbed of activity, with everyone preparing for a conflict they never imagined would come to their doorstep. The air was thick with tension, and even the normally serene atmosphere seemed charged with anticipation. Dr. Corrin continued to work tirelessly, trying to decipher the mysterious signals that might hold the key to their survival. Despite the mounting pressure, Corrin's mind remained focused. The signals had become clearer over the past few hours, though they still made little sense. It was like a puzzle, one piece at a time, but not enough to reveal the full picture. She had managed to get a few cryptic words, almost as if they were being sent by a higher intelligence or some kind of advanced machine. She couldn't be sure yet, but the signals could be the only link they had to understanding their enemy. The warship, after all, didn't seem to be sending out any communication, giving the Zorakians no chance to negotiate or even understand their invaders' intentions. Corrin's face grew tense as she studied the data. The signals were a mix of static and patterns that seemed to shift, but in her heart, she felt the pull of something important. It wasn't just a message from the enemy. It was an opportunity, an opening to bridge the gap between the two civilizations, to avoid total annihilation. But it was taking time, and time was something they didn't have much of. Meanwhile, on the battlefield below, Commander Kalin was organizing his forces. There was a heaviness in the air, as the Zorakian soldiers prepared for what was sure to be the most difficult fight of their lives. Kalin had always admired his people's resilience, but he could see the fear in their eyes. This was unlike anything they had trained for. They were used to peace, to science, to diplomacy, not war. But now, they had no choice but to face the unknown invader. Kalin paced back and forth in front of his troops, trying to steady his own nerves before addressing them. The preparation of the defense systems was going well, but they were still far from ready. Their weapons, though powerful in their own right, were not designed for combat against an enemy as technologically advanced as the warship above them. They had nothing to go on but their will to protect their home and the belief that, somehow, they could survive this. "Listen to me," Kalin began, his voice firm yet filled with the emotion of the moment. "We don't know everything about this enemy. We don't know their weapons, their strategies, or their plans. But we do know one thing. We are Zorakians, and we fight for what is ours. For our families, for our way of life, for Zorath itself." The soldiers nodded, some more confidently than others, but the message was clear. They were in this together, no matter how uncertain the future seemed. Kalin continued, "No matter how fierce the enemy, we will hold our ground. We may not be warriors, but we are a people of intellect, of innovation, and of heart. If there's a way to survive this, we will find it." Kalin's speech gave his soldiers a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't fighting for glory or power. They were fighting for their very existence. As the tension in the air grew heavier, Kalin couldn't help but wonder how much longer they could last without more information. The warship's arrival was imminent, and even though they had made preparations, it was clear that their chances were slim without a better understanding of their adversary. Up in the warship, Thorak stood on the bridge, staring down at Zorath. His crew worked in perfect synchronization, preparing for the next phase of their mission. Thorak had been trained for this moment for years, but as he observed the peaceful planet below, a twinge of hesitation crept into his thoughts. He couldn't ignore the strange feeling that had begun to gnaw at him. There was something different about this mission, something about Zorath's culture, their resilience, their unyielding hope in the face of devastation. He had seen the reports, but the truth was far more complex than he had anticipated. Thorak knew that this mission wasn't going to be as easy as the commanders had led him to believe. The Zorakians were not some primitive, defenseless race. They were intelligent, capable, and determined. He could already see the signs of resistance building, even though they hadn't made their first move yet. And yet there was a part of him, a quiet part, that wondered if he was making the right decision. But orders were orders, and his duty was to follow them. As the warship prepared to deploy, Thorak's gaze shifted to the planet below. Zorath's beauty was breathtaking from up here, The lush landscapes, the pristine cities, the shimmering waters that reflected the distant stars. It was a paradise, and Thorek couldn't help but think that it would be a shame to destroy it. He shook the thought from his mind. No, there was no turning back now. Back on Zoreth, the scientists had begun to make breakthroughs. Dr. Corin had successfully isolated one of the signals, and the implications were massive. She believed it was an offer, an opportunity to communicate with the warship. She wasted no time in assembling a team of experts to decode the message. If it was true, if they could establish contact, there was a chance, however small, that they could avoid the destruction they had feared. But time was running out. The warship was mere hours away from entering orbit. As the countdown continued, both sides prepared for the inevitable clash, each unaware that the key to survival lay in the hands of a single scientist and her team. Would they succeed in decoding the message in time, or would the galaxy witness the fall of yet another peaceful civilization? The battle for Zoreth had already begun, but the true war, one of knowledge, hope, and diplomacy, was about to unfold. The warship was now within striking distance, and all eyes on Zoreth were fixed upward. The world had never experienced such a heavy atmosphere. The usual hum of daily life had given way to a silence that was suffocating, broken only by the frantic whispers of those preparing for the worst. Dr. Corin's team had worked tirelessly to decode the mysterious message, but time was running out, and she feared that their efforts might be in vain. The signal they had intercepted, while providing some insight into the enemy's methods, was still incomplete. It contained fragmented data, hints at patterns, but no definitive answers. The urgency was mounting with every passing second. As the warship's engines hummed louder and louder, the Zorakians braced themselves for what was coming, even though no one knew exactly what that would be. Corin paced nervously in her lab, fingers running through her hair. Her mind raced. "There's got to be something more," she muttered under her breath. "We're missing something." She stared at the glowing screen in front of her, the data flickering as if mocking her. It was clear that whatever the enemy was planning, they were far more advanced than the Zorakians could have imagined. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden chirping of an alert. Her heart skipped a beat. The message, it had changed. The static had diminished, and a new signal pattern emerged, one that seemed almost deliberate. Her eyes widened. This was different. It wasn't just random data anymore. There was intent behind it. Without hesitation, Corin activated the communication system, sending a signal to the central command. "Callan, you need to hear this," she said, voice urgent. "I think I've found something." Minutes later, Commander Callan stood in her lab, looking at the screen where the new signal played. His face was stern, but the faintest glimmer of hope flickered in his eyes. "What is it? What are we looking at?" Corin tapped a few keys, isolating the parts of the signal that had shifted. "This isn't just noise. It's a message, something in a language we can understand, but it's not entirely human." She paused, taking a breath before continuing. "It's an invitation. A challenge, perhaps. A warning, even. But we have to decipher the rest quickly." Callan nodded, his mind working over the implications. "A challenge," he repeated, staring at the screen. "What kind of challenge?" Before Corin could answer, another alarm blared, interrupting their thoughts. The warship had entered orbit, and Zoreth was now within its crosshairs. The time for words was over. The time for action had arrived. "We'll need to act fast," Callan said, his voice calm but full of urgency. "Prepare the defense systems, but keep the lines of communication open. We need to make contact before they fire." The tension was palpable as the Zorakian forces scrambled to their stations, preparing for a battle that none of them were ready for. In the command center, soldiers hurriedly ran diagnostics on their weapons, while scientists like Corin worked furiously to decode the message that could determine the outcome of the coming war. Callan turned back to Corin. "Can we reach them before they strike? Can we buy ourselves some time?" Corin's eyes were glued to the screen as the final pieces of the signal fell into place. We might be able to. But it will take a delicate touch. If we send the wrong message, they could take it as a sign of aggression. We need to show them that we mean no harm, that we're trying to communicate. The seconds felt like hours as the team worked together, formulating a response to send to the warship above. The fear that had once plagued them all began to settle into a quiet resolve. They knew this was their only chance. Suddenly, the warship's massive cannons activated, and the ground beneath them trembled. The Zorakian defenses were put to the test as they faced the unimaginable power of the invader. But Callan didn't flinch. He stood tall, watching as the first wave of the enemy's firepower descended upon them. And yet, just as the first blast was about to hit the ground, an unexpected signal interrupted the transmission, a strange pulse of energy that jammed the warship's systems. It wasn't a Zorakian weapon. It was something far more advanced. The pulse sent ripples through the warship's network, causing it to falter for a moment. Corin's eyes lit up with realization. "It's them," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "They're trying to help us." The pulse stopped as quickly as it had started, and the warship hesitated. For a brief moment, everything was still, and the Zorakians felt a strange sense of hope. The enemy, whoever they were, had just given them a brief respite. And now, with time on their side, they had to act quickly. Callan turned to his team. "We can't waste this opportunity. Send the message, now." With no time to lose, Corin sent a transmission, a simple but clear message. "We seek peace. We want to understand. Please, talk to us." The words were sent, leaving only the eerie silence that followed. The seconds stretched on, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. Back on the warship, Thorek felt the strange pulse ripple through his own ship's systems. He couldn't ignore the feeling that something had changed. The Zorakians were not as helpless as they appeared. In fact, they seemed to be more capable than he'd originally thought. This was not a simple mission to conquer. Something else was at play here, and he could feel it in his bones. For a long moment, there was only silence between the two forces. And then the response came. It was a single word, spoken in a language neither side had heard before. And in that instant, the course of the battle, and perhaps the future of Zorath itself, was forever changed. The moment the cryptic word echoed through the communication channels, a wave of shock rippled through both the Zorakian and enemy forces. The word, strange and alien in nature, seemed to reverberate with meaning, but no one could immediately decipher it. It was a single, brief utterance, yet it carried with it the weight of 1,000 unspoken questions. Everyone on Zorath held their breath, waiting for something, anything, to follow. Commander Callan stood motionless, staring at the transmission screen, his brow furrowed in confusion, trying to make sense of the message that had come from the enemy warship. His instincts told him that this was no ordinary communication. This was something far more significant, but the question was, what did it mean? Dr. Corin, ever the scientist, jumped into action. "We need to analyze it," she said urgently. "This could be the key to everything." The team scrambled to decode the strange word. But no matter how much they tried, the algorithms, the data, and even their most advanced linguistic software could not make sense of it. It was beyond their comprehension. The word was untranslatable, as though it had been constructed with an entirely different logic or syntax. It didn't fit into any known language pattern. "This is..." Corin's voice trailed off. She had no words to explain it. Meanwhile, aboard the warship, Thorek, the commanding officer, paced in his quarters. His eyes flickered between the command screens, where the response from Zorath had just appeared. He had anticipated a counterattack, or perhaps more aggression. But this was unexpected. The Zorakian message was calm. No threats, no violence, just a request for understanding. It was not what he had expected from such a primitive species. Thorek's mind raced. Could they be trying to communicate? Could they be more advanced than he initially thought? But that was impossible, wasn't it? His people had scouted Zoreth, had observed their military, their technology. The Zorakians were primitive, at best. They had no chance against the might of his warship. And yet, this message, this peaceful offering, left him conflicted. Thorak turned to his most trusted advisor, General Thar. "What do you think this means?" he asked, gesturing to the communication screen where the message sat. Thar looked at it carefully, his reptilian eyes narrowing. "It could be a trick," he said, voice low. "They could be attempting to buy time, or they could be attempting to deceive us." "I don't think so," Thorak replied, his voice firm. "If they were trying to deceive us, they would have fought back by now. No, there's something more here. We can't afford to dismiss it without understanding." With a sharp motion, he issued orders to his communications officers. "Send a reply. Ask for clarification. Let them know we are not here to destroy them, but to understand." Meanwhile, on Zoreth, the tension was unbearable. Kalen's team worked furiously to try and decipher any additional clues from the message, but there were none. Everything seemed to come to a grinding halt. The impending warship was still looming above them, its presence a constant reminder that time was not on their side. "Maybe they're testing us," Kalen mused aloud, pacing back and forth in front of his team. "They've seen our weaknesses. Perhaps they want to see if we'll fold under pressure." "We can't afford to wait any longer," Corin said, breaking him from his thoughts. "We have to do something. Anything." Before Kalen could respond, another transmission from the warship came through. The Zorakians froze. This time, however, it wasn't just a single word. It was a series of phrases, rapidly spoken, each one following the other in quick succession. The tone was measured, but the intensity was unmistakable. The warship was making its move. "The ship is going to attack," Corin whispered, her voice filled with panic. "We don't have much time." "Get the defense systems online," Kalen barked. "We need to hold them off long enough to get answers." The Zorakian forces sprang into action. Within moments, the planet's defensive shields were raised, their energy crackling with life as they made a last-ditch effort to protect their home. Weapons were activated, preparing for a battle they might not survive. As the warship began to charge its main cannons, something unexpected happened. The Zorakian defenses, while holding steady, began to experience strange fluctuations in their energy levels. It was as if the very fabric of their shields was being tested in a way they had never experienced before. Corin analyzed the data urgently. It's like their weapons are interfacing with ours. They're probing us, looking for weaknesses." "What does that mean?" Kalen asked, frustration evident in his voice. "It means," Corin replied, "that they might not intend to destroy us after all. They're testing our defenses, looking for vulnerabilities, trying to figure out how we function. They don't know everything about us." Kalen stared at the screen, his mind working through the possibilities. "So they're not attacking. They're just preparing." "Yes," Corin confirmed. "They're waiting for something. For a response. For our next move." Kalen turned back to his communications officers. "Send the message again. But this time, add something different. Let them know we are ready to negotiate." The seconds dragged on, each one feeling like a lifetime. The Zorakian forces were tense, the air thick with uncertainty. But just as they were about to give up hope, another message arrived. This one clearer, stronger, and more direct. It was not the voice of a commander this time, but something far more profound. It was an offer, a formal proposal of peace. "We will not destroy you. We will offer you a chance to join us, but only if you prove yourselves worthy. Do not waste this opportunity, Zorakians. We await your answer." As the words flashed across the screen, Corin felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. This was not a threat. This was a turning point. Zoreth had been given a choice, one that would decide the fate of their entire species. The days that followed the warship's mysterious transmission were some of the most tense in the history of Zoreth. The entire planet seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move. Commander Kalen, despite his outward composure, could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. The message had been clear. They were not facing an enemy who wanted to simply conquer or destroy them. No, this was something entirely different. The warship's offer, while strange, seemed to hold a potential for something even greater than survival, an opportunity to join something much larger. But what did that truly mean? The Zorakians had no intention of submitting to alien control. They had fought too hard to build their civilization, to let it fall under the yoke of another species, no matter how powerful or advanced. However, Kalen knew that this was not just about pride or power. This was a decision that would determine the future of Zorath itself. If they rejected the offer, they might face complete annihilation. If they accepted, they might find themselves part of something far more complex than they could imagine. The decision wasn't just up to Kalen, though. It was a collective one. A council of the most prominent minds, scientists, politicians, and military leaders had been assembled in the war room. The room hummed with tension as they waited for the latest data from Dr. Corin, who was still tirelessly working to decrypt every facet of the enemy's message. "I've been reviewing their transmission again," Dr. Corin said, her voice filled with exhaustion but determination. "It's clear that they are offering us more than just a chance to survive. They want something from us. But what? They've seen our strength, our resolve, and yet they offer us peace. It's not the act of conquerors. It's the behavior of someone seeking something more." The room fell silent as everyone processed her words. Kalen leaned forward, staring at the holographic displays that now showed the latest information. His fingers drummed impatiently on the console. "We need to ask ourselves a question," Kalen said, his voice calm yet urgent. "What would a species like this want with a small, isolated planet like ours? What do they need from us?" The council members exchanged uncertain glances. One of them, a senior advisor named General Novak, spoke up. "They might see something in us that we don't yet understand. The Zorakian spirit, perhaps. Our capacity to endure and fight back. Or perhaps our technology, though primitive in comparison to theirs, could serve some purpose for them." Dr. Corin's eyes lit up as if a spark of realization had just hit her. "Exactly," she said. "They've studied us. They've observed our strengths, our resilience, and our potential. But what if they're not just testing us? What if they're recruiting us?" Kalen raised an eyebrow. "Recruiting? For what?" "For something bigger," Corin replied. "They are likely a part of a vast intergalactic alliance, a coalition of planets. They might need Zorath to join them in a greater cause, one that could be beyond our comprehension. Perhaps a war or a conquest, or maybe even something noble that we can't yet see." It was a theory that made sense, but the weight of it was immense. Kalen's heart pounded in his chest as the room fell into deep contemplation. This wasn't just about defending Zorath anymore. It was about Zorath's place in the greater galaxy. "We need to make contact again," Kalen said, after a long pause. "But this time, we need to ask the right questions. We need to understand exactly what it is they want from us." He turned to his communications officers. "Prepare the transmission. Tell them we are open to discussions, but we need to know what joining them would entail. We won't be blind participants in their plans. We need transparency." As the message was sent, the council members waited in silence. No one knew what to expect. What could these alien beings possibly want with a relatively insignificant planet like Zorath? Hours passed, each one heavier than the last. And just when it seemed like the warship might remain silent, the transmission pinged. This time, however, there was no cryptic message. It was straightforward, direct, and chilling in its clarity. "Your world is not what it seems, Zorath," the voice boomed, echoing across their communication systems. It wasn't the same voice as before. This one was deeper, more commanding. "We have observed your history, your people. You have a potential that far exceeds your current existence. We do not seek to conquer you, but we require your assistance. The galaxy is on the brink of an irreversible conflict, one that could wipe out entire systems. The time for isolation has ended. Kalen's blood ran cold as he listened. This was no longer about simply avoiding destruction. This was about the survival of entire civilizations. You are being offered a place in something far greater than your world. Your decision will shape not only your future, but the future of countless others. But be warned, this is not a decision to be taken lightly. We will not wait forever. Choose wisely. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Kalen and the council in stunned silence. The weight of the message was overwhelming. It was a call to action, a demand for Zoreth to join a war that could change everything. The choice was now in their hands. For Kalen, the path ahead seemed unclear. Could Zoreth, a planet that had spent so much time in isolation, truly step into a galactic conflict? Could they trust these aliens, even if their intentions seemed to be rooted in something greater than mere conquest? The decision had to be made. The future of Zoreth, and perhaps the future of the entire galaxy, now rested on their shoulders. Would they accept the invitation and join the alliance, or would they stand alone, facing the unknown? The clock was ticking, and there was no turning back. With one last glance at the screen, Kalen spoke, his voice steady but filled with the gravity of the moment. Prepare for the next steps. We answer them tomorrow. Zoreth will not remain in the dark any longer.